when European warfare met its match. The British column moved through the forest in textbook formation. Scouts ahead, flankers out, main body maintaining cohesion despite the terrain. Major Henry Depard had fought in India and Afghanistan. He knew how to move troops through hostile country. Then the forest exploded. Gunfire came from the trees above, from behind ridgelines that shouldn't have concealed positions, from dense bushes scouts had marked as impassable. His flankers dropped before they could return fire. The main column tried to form defensive squares, standard response to ambush, and became a stationary target as Maori warriors adjusted angles and poured fire into the clustered mass. Depard ordered retreat. His men fell back in disciplined fashion, exactly as trained. When they reached their supply wagons 3 miles back, they found the guards dead and half the ammunition gone. The Maori had been behind them the entire time. This was New Zealand in 1845, and British commanders were learning an expensive lesson. Centuries of European warfare experience meant nothing against an enemy who'd never read their manuals. The doctrine that conquered Europe. British officers in the 1840s carried institutional knowledge from Waterloo to Kabul. They knew how armies fought. You formed lines, exchanged volleys, closed with bayonets. Artillery softened positions. Cavalry exploited breakthroughs. Infantry held ground. The side with better discipline, superior numbers, or stronger positions won. Mathematical, predictable, proven across 3 continents. Maori tactical doctrine had evolved from entirely different problems. No open plains for mass formations. Dense forests where maintaining visual contact was impossible. Steep terrain that broke unit cohesion. Centuries of tribal warfare where the objective wasn't holding ground. It was preserving your warriors while degrading enemy capability. 2 military systems, each sophisticated in completely incompatible ways. The enemy who wouldn't stand still. British forces needed decisive battle. Maori war parties refused to provide one. A war band would hit a British patrol at dawn, inflict casualties, vanish before reinforcements arrived, reappear that afternoon 5 miles away attacking supply lines, strike the camp at midnight, kill sentries, disappear. Attack again at first light from a direction the British had fortified against. European officers called it cowardice. It was operational tempo their logistics couldn't match. Colonel Henry Depard wrote in frustration, "We march to engage the enemy. The enemy engages us, then declines to remain engaged. We hold the field. We have gained nothing." Holding terrain was meaningless when your opponent didn't value terrain. Maori forces could abandon positions British troops spent weeks capturing, build new fortifications elsewhere, and resume operations as if nothing had changed. Every British victory was tactically real and strategically irrelevant. The forest had eyes. British columns learned they were being watched days before contact. Maori scouts tracked movements, learned patterns, identified weaknesses. When did they break camp? How did officers position sentries? Which soldiers were disciplined, which careless? British scouts couldn't reciprocate. European troops trained for open country warfare were nearly blind in New Zealand forests. Officers knew they were under observation but couldn't locate observers or prevent intelligence gathering. Then came the ambush, timed perfectly. British forces moving through terrain their engineers had assessed as secure suddenly took coordinated fire from positions that shouldn't exist. Warriors in trees. Warriors behind ridgelines. Warriors emerging from bush so dense British troops thought it impassable. The ambushes hit from multiple angles simultaneously, then melted away before British forces could mount coordinated response. Standard doctrine said hold ground and form defensive perimeter. In New Zealand forests, that meant staying in the kill zone while attackers repositioned. Officers who ordered immediate dispersal and withdrawal were initially accused of cowardice. Then casualty reports from officers who'd followed orthodox doctrine made the point. European tactics got soldiers killed in terrain they weren't designed for. The retreat, that wasn't. Maori war parties would attack ferociously, then suddenly break and run. British forces, seeing enemy in apparent panic, would pursue. Every military manual said exploit enemy retreat to complete victory. The retreat was theater. Pursuing British troops would follow fleeing Maori warriors into prepared killing grounds where larger forces waited, or through terrain that broke their formation cohesion, or far enough from supply lines that the pursuers became the vulnerable party. What looked like victory became a trap. Repeatedly, Captain William Mercer recorded the pattern. The enemy fled in disorder. We pursued with vigor. We then found ourselves surrounded, our formation broken, our ammunition exhausted. The disorder had been manufactured for our benefit. The deception worked even after British commanders knew about it, because distinguishing genuine retreat from tactical withdrawal was impossible in combat chaos. Soldiers wanted to believe they'd won. That desire made the trap spring every time. Warfare before combat. Before major engagements, Maori warriors performed Haka, the war dance that terrified European observers. Aggressive postures, fierce expressions, rhythmic chanting that seemed designed to break morale. British soldiers who'd stood firm under artillery fire found themselves unsettled by performance art. But Haka wasn't just psychological intimidation. Experienced Maori warriors read enemy response. Which soldiers showed fear? Which held steady? Where are the weak points in enemy formation? The Haka gathered tactical intelligence while simultaneously undermining enemy confidence. Maori forces also used calculated provocation to control engagement timing. Raid British positions, steal supplies, kill sentries, not to achieve military objectives, but to provoke British forces into attacking at times and places Maori commanders had chosen. European officers understood the manipulation, but couldn't ignore provocations without appearing weak. Political pressure demanded response. Tactical wisdom suggested patience. Politics won, and British forces attacked when and where their opponents wanted. The night belonged to them. European armies in the 1840s established defensive positions at sunset and waited for dawn. Fighting at night, with troops who needed visual communication and tight formation control, was asking for chaos. Maori warriors owned the darkness. Silent approaches, coordinated strikes against specific targets. British sentries would die without raising alarm. Supply dumps would burn. Officers would be killed in their tents. Then nothing, just darkness and the knowledge that the attackers were gone before you knew they'd arrived. This forced British forces to maintain combat readiness through every night, which exhausted troops and degraded effectiveness. While British soldiers spent sleepless nights on high alert, Maori warriors rested safely at distance. The psychological cost matched the physical casualties. You can't maintain peak readiness when you haven't slept properly in weeks. Adaptation versus doctrine. European military success required soldiers to follow orders precisely and maintain formation discipline. Improvisation broke cohesion. Rigid doctrine was strength. Maori warriors operated with individual initiative within strategic frameworks. If ambush wasn't working, transition to harassment. If direct assault proved costly, shift to siege. If enemies adapted to one approach, try another. British forces couldn't match that fluidity. They fought the way their training demanded, which meant continuing tactics even when those tactics were failing. Lieutenant Colonel William Hume wrote, "We know their methods now. We prepare counters. We implement those counters successfully. Then we discover they're no longer using the methods we prepared against. They have moved to different methods, and we must begin analysis again." By the time British forces developed responses to Maori tactics, those tactics had evolved. The learning cycle couldn't keep pace with the adaptation cycle. Intelligence warfare. Maori intelligence networks provided accurate information about British movements, supply levels, morale conditions. British intelligence about Maori forces was consistently wrong, numbers off by factors of 2 or 3, position reports revealing decoys, attack predictions that never materialized. Maori commanders understood information warfare. feed false intelligence through sources British trusted, create visible camps that were actually empty, move forces at night, so British scouts reported yesterday's positions. They weren't just concealing information. They were actively shaping what British commanders believed, which meant shaping British decisions. Logistics as weapon. European armies required elaborate supply systems. Food, ammunition, medical supplies, all transported from secure bases. Maori forces traveled light and lived off land. This asymmetry created strategic vulnerability. Maori war parties targeted supply convoys, destroyed storage depots, and attacked infrastructure supporting British operations. European commanders had to dedicate enormous force percentages to supply protection, reducing combat strength available for operations. A British column might have 1,000 soldiers, but 400 were guarding supplies, 200 were securing communications, 150 were establishing defensive positions. That left 250 for actual combat operations, and those 250 needed the other 750 to function. Maori forces with 300 warriors could put all 300 into combat operations. The numerical advantage reversed in practice. Fortifications as tools, not symbols. When Maori commanders chose to defend positions, they built sophisticated fortifications with overlapping fields of fire, protected fighting positions, and defensive depth that impressed British military engineers. Then they'd abandon the before siege could develop, and the garrison would vanish. British commanders kept expecting final desperate defense that never came. They'd invest weeks in siege preparation, bring up artillery, plan assault, only to find the fortification evacuated and defenders gone. This violated European military honor codes. You defended positions to the death. Retreat was shame. Maori tactical doctrine prioritized preserving fighting forces over holding ground. A pa was a tool. When it stopped being useful, you abandoned it and built another elsewhere. Ground was temporary. Warriors were valuable. British forces kept winning battles that accomplished nothing strategic. They'd capture positions at significant cost, only to find those positions were meaningless to enemy strategic calculations. The enemy without a manual. What truly confounded British commanders? Maori tactical doctrine wasn't codified anywhere. No manuals to capture and study. No written doctrine to analyze and counter. Each Rangatairo war leader operated with personal tactical style while sharing common principles. This meant British forces who learned to fight one Maori commander found those lessons didn't apply against another. The tactical creativity was feature, not bug. European officers were trained to identify enemy doctrine, recognize patterns, develop counters. This worked fighting other European armies operating from similar foundations. Against Maori forces, where innovation was encouraged rather than suppressed, pattern recognition failed because patterns kept changing. The sophistication and adaptation. Modern military historians studying Maori tactics see principles that align with contemporary special operations doctrine. Small unit tactics, terrain exploitation, psychological operations, intelligence warfare, logistics interdiction. Maori commanders had developed through practical experience what modern militaries teach through formal doctrine. British forces in New Zealand had better weapons, more soldiers, superior logistics, professional training. They struggled for decades because Maori tactical doctrine exploited weaknesses in European warfare that continental experience hadn't revealed. Dense terrain negated formation advantages. Unconventional tactics neutralized superior firepower. Psychological operations degraded morale advantages. Intelligence dominance overcame numerical superiority. The confusion British commanders experienced wasn't because Maori tactics were primitive. It was because they were sophisticated in different ways, evolved through different military challenges to solve different tactical problems. European doctrine was optimized for European warfare, open fields, mass formations, positional advantage, attritional combat. Maori doctrine was optimized for New Zealand warfare, forested terrain, mobile operations, psychological dominance, preservation of force. When those systems met, the locally adapted one had inherent advantages. Different rules. British Lieutenant Colonel Henry Depard, after 3 years in New Zealand, wrote to the War Office, "We are not losing because our soldiers lack courage or our officers lack skill. We are losing because we are playing chess while they are playing a game we do not recognize. Every move we make is correct by our rules and ineffective by theirs. They do not defeat us in battle. They make battle irrelevant." That was the real sophistication, not just tactical execution, but strategic understanding that rendered European military advantages meaningless through asymmetric approach. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the strongest or the most numerous. It's the one who's fighting by different rules that make your strengths irrelevant and exploit weaknesses you didn't know you had. The British eventually adapted, but it took decades and fundamental rethinking of tactical doctrine. The confusion wasn't temporary obstacle. It was recognition that their entire military framework had been optimized for the wrong problem.